Apache Kid, Army scout who became America's most feared outlaw. $5,000 reward, dead or alive, Apache Kid. The wanted posters plastered across Arizona territory told only half the story. How did the Army's most trusted Apache scout become the Southwest's most hunted fugitive? The same tracking skills that once served the U.S. military now kept him perpetually one step ahead of his pursuers. After killing 2 lawmen and escaping into the mountains, Apache Kid's legend grew with each passing year. Some called him a murderous renegade, others a victim of frontier injustice. The truth lies somewhere in between, early years and first steps into the white man's world. To understand the man who became Apache Kid, we must first understand the child. Born Haske Bene Natal in the early 1860s, the boy who would become infamous first drew breath in Aravapa Canyon, approximately 25 miles south of what would later become the San Carlos Apache Reservation. His birthplace sat near a small stream the Apaches called Little Running Water, a modest beginning for a figure who would later command such outsized fear and fascination. Haske belonged to the Aravapa Apache, a subcommunity within the broader San Carlos Apache Confederation, itself a branch of the Western Apache. Some historical records suggest he may have instead been of White Mountain Apache lineage, a detail highlighting the complex tribal relationships of the period and the frequently imprecise record-keeping of non-native authorities. The trajectory of young Haske's life changed dramatically during a military operation led by Clay Buford, the reservation police chief at San Carlos. Buford, a Confederate veteran who later served as a sergeant with the 5th Cavalry during the Indian Wars, orchestrated a raid on an Aravapa settlement. The primary target was a respected warrior named Togade Choose, known to white authorities as Together Shoes. Togade Choose held significant status among his people as a former member of Captain Chiquito's band. The U.S. government classified this group as SI and considered them a high-priority military target during ongoing operations against resistant Apache factions. When Buford's forces struck, they found the pre-adolescent Haske living among Togade Chew's family. The exact nature of Haske's relationship with Togade Choose remains contested among scholars. Some evidence suggests the elder Apache was Haske's father, while other accounts identify him as the boy's grandfather. What remains uncontested is that following the raid, Buford took both Togade Choose and his entire family into custody, including young Haske. What happened next defied conventional patterns of captivity. Despite being forcibly removed from his community, Haske developed an unexpected affinity for Buford. The boy frequently followed the police chief around the San Carlos Reservation, observing his movements and mannerisms. Buford, noting the child's intelligence and curiosity, eventually adopted Haske informally. Under Buford's tutelage, Haske received his first instruction in marksmanship, skills that would later define both his military service and his notoriety. Buford provided the boy with ammunition and an old carbine rifle, allowing him to practice shooting within an abandoned cattle pen. These early lessons formed the foundation of Haske's exceptional abilities with firearms. During this period of cultural transition, Haske formed a significant friendship with Joe Stevens, the son of George Stevens, a farmer and trader in Arizona Territory. The elder Stevens had married the daughter of an Apache war chief, creating a family that straddled cultural boundaries, much as Haske himself would throughout his life. Haske and young Stevens frequently hunted together in the mountains surrounding San Carlos. Years later, Stevens would recall these expeditions with remarkable clarity, noting that throughout their time together, he rarely heard Haske speak ill of anyone. A striking character assessment, given the violent reputation that would later define him. The nearby silver mining settlement of Globe, Arizona, situated on the edge of the San Carlos Reservation, became another formative influence in Haske's development. The predominantly white community took a collective liking to the young Apache. Unable or unwilling to pronounce his native name, they began calling him Apache Kid, the moniker that would eventually appear on wanted posters across the Southwest. Globe residents later recalled Haske as an intelligent, kind, and handsome young man who spoke English with impressive fluency. For approximately 5 to 6 years, he helped local ranchers tend their cattle and apprenticed with a town butcher, further integrating into white society while maintaining connections to his Apache heritage. This period of Haski's life reveals the complex cultural negotiations that characterize the American frontier. Far from the simplified narratives of conflict that dominated popular accounts, Haski's experiences demonstrate how individuals navigated the complicated terrain between indigenous and settler societies. His ability to gain acceptance in Globe while maintaining his Apache identity illustrates the often overlooked personal relationships that existed alongside the broader patterns of conquest and displacement. The apparent ease with which Haski moved between these worlds would serve him well when he later joined Sieber's scouts. However, this cultural fluency also placed him in an increasingly precarious position, trusted by neither side completely, yet expected to demonstrate absolute loyalty to both. This fundamental tension would eventually erupt into the violence that transformed the respected Army Scout into the legendary fugitive known as Apache Kid. Career as a U.S. Army Scout, the year 1881 marked a pivotal transition in the life of the young man now widely known as Apache Kid. After years of straddling the cultural divide between his Apache heritage and his experiences in white settlements, he encountered a figure who would further shape his destiny: Sieber, a German-American who served as Chief of Scouts for the U.S. Army. Sieber, a hardened veteran with a reputation for stern but fair leadership, quickly recognized potential in the young Apache. Much like Clay Buford before him, Sieber took on a mentoring role, appointing Apache Kid as his personal assistant. This special position granted Kid access to military operations and strategy discussions typically closed to indigenous scouts, creating a unique apprenticeship that accelerated his development as a military asset. Not everyone welcomed this arrangement. Tom Horn, another scout who would later gain notoriety as a hired gunman, expressed particular resentment toward what he perceived as preferential treatment. Horn dismissively referred to Apache Kid as Sieber's pet, a nickname that reflected the growing tension among the scouts competing for recognition and authority. Apache Kid's exceptional abilities soon transcended his role as Sieber's assistant. His fluency in multiple languages, Apache dialects, Spanish and English, combined with his intimate knowledge of southwestern terrain, made him invaluable to military operations. Unlike many scouts who simply followed orders, Kid demonstrated analytical thinking and strategic insight that impressed military leadership. In autumn 1881, when the renowned Apache leader Geronimo escaped from San Carlos, the U.S. Army initiated an extensive manhunt across the southwestern territories and into Mexico. Apache Kid joined Sieber and other scouts in this pursuit, applying his tracking skills against one of the most elusive targets in military history. The irony that these same abilities would later enable his own evasion of capture was lost on military authorities at the time. The summer of 1882 proved particularly active for Apache Kid's developing military career. He participated in numerous reconnaissance missions and skirmishes along the Mexican border, where Apache bands frequently sought refuge from U.S. forces. His contributions became particularly significant on July 17th, when he assisted the 3rd and 6th Cavalry Regiments in securing victory at the Battle of Big Dry Wash. This engagement, which took place in Tonto Basin, represented one of the last major confrontations of the Apache Wars in Arizona Territory. Apache Kid's knowledge of indigenous fighting tactics proved crucial in anticipating and countering the movements of hostile forces. Military reports from the period note his exceptional bravery under fire and superior tactical judgment, remarkable commendations for an indigenous scout in an era of pervasive racial prejudice. Based on his consistent performance during his first 2 years of service, Apache Kid received promotion to sergeant within the Scout Corps, an uncommon achievement that reflected both his abilities and Sieber's advocacy. The promotion granted him command responsibilities over other Apache scouts, placing him in the complex position of enforcing U.S. military objectives among his own people. Perhaps the most compelling evidence of Apache Kid's extraordinary capabilities appeared in a Los Angeles Times account from this period. While patrolling the high plateau region near the reservation, he observed a distant group of approaching riders. Based solely on their riding patterns and silhouettes against the horizon, Kid accurately determined the number of cavalry, horses, and the proportion of white soldiers to indigenous scouts. When the group arrived, his predictions proved 100% accurate, astonishing the military officers present. This incident highlights the exceptional observational skills that made Apache scouts so valuable to the U.S. military campaign in the Southwest. However, it also reveals the fundamental contradiction of American military policy toward indigenous peoples. During this period, the same government attempting to suppress Apache culture and sovereignty simultaneously relied on and rewarded the cultural knowledge and skills that emerged from that heritage. Apache Kid's military service represents a complex historical phenomenon common throughout colonial expansion. Imperial powers frequently relied on indigenous expertise to extend control over territories they sought to claim, creating complicated allegiances and identities among those who served as intermediaries. For men like Apache Kid, such service offered both opportunity and profound ethical challenges. The skills and reputation Kid developed during these years contributed significantly to his later ability to evade capture. The military training that transformed him into an effective scout also equipped him to become an elusive fugitive. When circumstances dramatically changed in May 1887, the very institution that had elevated him would soon pursue him, initiating the transformation from respected sergeant to legendary outlaw. The life-changing incident. May 1887 brought a seismic disruption to San Carlos Reservation, both literally and figuratively. A powerful earthquake struck the region, causing structural damage to buildings and resulting in over 50 casualties. Beyond the physical destruction, the earthquake carried profound cultural significance for the Apache communities. They interpreted such natural calamities as powerful omens, harbingers of greater troubles to come. In response to this perceived warning, tribal leaders organized a gathering to perform traditional prayers and ceremonies intended to avert further disaster. Among those attending was Togade Chus, the man who had raised Apache Kid before his adoption by Clay Buford. The gathering, meant to restore spiritual balance, instead became the catalyst for violence that would forever alter Kid's trajectory. As the ceremony progressed, Togade Chus consumed significant quantities of tiswin, a potent corn-based alcoholic beverage brewed by the Apache despite reservation prohibitions against its production. The fermented drink had been a traditional part of Apache social gatherings, but had been banned by reservation authorities who viewed it as a contributor to disorder and violence. With inhibitions lowered by the tiswin, Togade Chus began directing taunts and insults at an older warrior named Rip. The antagonism between these men had deep roots. Both had once competed for the affections of the same woman, who later became Apache Kid's mother. This personal history, kept dormant for years, erupted into public view during the gathering. Gonzozi, Rip's brother, watched the escalating verbal assault with growing anger. When Togade Chus' taunts became particularly severe, Gonzozi intervened directly. Drawing his weapon, he fired at Togade Chus, killing him instantly. The gunshot transformed the ceremonial gathering into chaos as tribal factions quickly took sides. News of the altercation reached Sieber at the agency headquarters. Recognizing the potential for broader conflict, Sieber dispatched Apache Kid and several other scouts to investigate and restore order. This assignment, routine in nature, placed Kid at the center of a situation that would trigger the collapse of his military career and reputation. Upon arriving at the scene, Apache Kid found Togade Chus lying dead in a pool of blood. The sight of his foster father's body produced an immediate and visceral reaction. Adding to the complexity of the situation, Kid learned that one of Togade Chus' allies had already enacted retribution, killing Gonzozi in revenge for the initial shooting. The cycle of violence placed Apache Kid in an impossible position. As a sergeant in the Scout Corps, his duty required him to investigate objectively and report back to Sieber. As Togade Chus' son in Apache tradition, cultural obligations demanded he seek vengeance against those responsible, specifically against Rip, who remained alive. "I will follow the Apache way," Kid reportedly declared to those present. "Blood must answer blood." This pronouncement reflected the traditional justice system that had governed Apache communities for generations before the reservation system disrupted their social structures. A tribal elder named Wide Eyes immediately recognized the dangerous implications of Kid's declaration. As one of the few remaining traditional authorities recognized by both Apache people and reservation officials, Wide Eyes intervened. "You wear the uniform of the soldiers," he reminded Kid. "You cannot follow the old ways while walking the white man's path." This prohibition placed Kid at the center of a cultural conflict that many indigenous people faced during this period of forced assimilation. The U.S. government demanded adherence to Anglo-American legal concepts while systematically undermining traditional governance structures. For individuals like Apache Kid who had achieved success within the military system, these contradictory expectations created impossible choices. The events at the gathering represented more than personal tragedy for Apache Kid. They exemplified the broader contradictions of U.S. Indian policy in the late 19th century. Government authorities simultaneously suppressed traditional cultural practices while expecting indigenous people to abandon centuries of social custom instantly. This fundamental contradiction would soon explode into violence with far-reaching consequences for Apache Kid and the broader Southwest. Rather than resolving Apache Kid's internal conflict, Wide Eye's prohibition merely postponed it. The cultural imperative to avenge Togadechus remained powerful, creating tension that would ultimately rupture Kid's carefully constructed identity as a loyal scout. The earthquake that Apache communities viewed as an omen had indeed presaged disaster, though not in the form they anticipated. From respected scout to notorious outlaw, despite Wide Eye's prohibition and Sieber's direct orders to stand down, Apache Kid could not reconcile his military duty with the cultural imperatives of his upbringing. Several days after the initial confrontation, he slipped away from his post, accompanied by several allies from the reservation. They traveled silently to Rip's village along Aravapa Creek, where Kid fulfilled his blood obligation, shooting the elderly warrior who had indirectly caused Togadechu's death. The killing represented a definitive break with his military career. Apache Kid and his companions immediately fled into the surrounding mountains, fully aware that their actions would be interpreted not as cultural justice, but as murder under territorial law. For the first time, the tracking skills that had made Kid valuable to the military now served his own survival as he evaded the initial pursuit parties sent after him. After several weeks of hiding, Gonchai, an influential tribal leader at San Carlos, located Kid's camp and initiated negotiations. Leveraging his status within both Apache and reservation power structures, Gonchai convinced Kid that surrender offered the only viable path forward. He assured the former scout that Sieber would recognize the cultural context of his actions and advocate for leniency. Kid agreed to return to San Carlos and face the consequences of his actions. On the designated day, he and his companions approached the agency headquarters to surrender their weapons and submit to authorities. Captain Francis Pierce, the military officer overseeing the reservation, watched the approaching group with suspicion. Pierce, who had limited experience with Apache customs and harbored deep distrust of all indigenous peoples, misinterpreted the demeanor of one of Kid's companions. "They're planning something," Pierce shouted to his soldiers. "Be ready." The tension escalated rapidly. One nervous soldier fired his weapon, and others quickly followed suit. In the confusion, Sieber rushed forward, attempting to recover the surrendered weapons to prevent further bloodshed. During this intervention, a bullet struck his leg, shattering the bone and inflicting an injury that would leave him permanently disabled. Apache Kid and several others seized the chaotic moment to escape once again. In the gunfire, Captain Pierce fell, fatally shot by a scout named Curly, a critical detail that would later become contested in court. The incident transformed what might have been a manageable disciplinary matter into a full-scale manhunt, with Apache Kid now implicated in the shooting of his former mentor and the death of an Army officer. Kid's group retreated to Deer Creek, where they stole several horses, including a prized mount belonging to Tom Horn. According to accounts from those who later surrendered, Kid initially advocated restraint, urging his companions to avoid unnecessary violence. However, one member of the group, a warrior called Conchai, ignored this counsel and killed a rancher named Bill Deal while stealing additional horses. Days later, the group raided a ranch near Fort Crittenden, further escalating their notoriety in territorial newspapers. Military authorities assembled a new pursuit force, led by the experienced scout Mickey Free and Lieutenant Carter Johnson. This specialized unit, comprised primarily of Apache scouts familiar with Kid's tactics, tracked the fugitives across the territory. On June 11th, they recovered the stolen horses, but found that Apache Kid had once again evaded capture through superior knowledge of the terrain. The situation grew serious enough that General Nelson Miles, the commander responsible for the final capture of Geronimo, traveled from California to personally oversee operations against Apache Kid. This level of military response reflected not just the seriousness of the charges against Kid, but also the symbolic importance of capturing a former sergeant who had turned against the system. Through continued diplomatic efforts by Conchai eventually surrendered to authorities. Following this, Apache Kid's mother joined negotiations, ultimately convincing her son to surrender peacefully rather than continue a life as a fugitive. On June 25, 1887, Apache Kid walked into the military camp at San Carlos and surrendered to Lieutenant Johnson. The military tribunal convened on June 28th, with Judge Lawrence Tyson presiding. Apache Kid and 4 companions faced charges of mutiny and desertion, serious military offenses that carried potential death sentences. The proceedings revealed deep divisions in the accounts of what had occurred during the surrender confrontation. 3 primary prosecution witnesses testified that Kid played no role in the shooting of Sieber or Captain Pierce. Sieber himself offered contradictory testimony, claiming Kid had attempted to reclaim surrendered weapons and had signaled others to escape. This discrepancy highlighted the personal betrayal Sieber felt, as well as the complex loyalties that informed testimony throughout the trial. Apache Kid admitted to desertion and killing Rip in retribution for Togade Chews, attributing his actions partly to Tiswin intoxication during the initial confrontation. Despite the conflicting testimony, the military court found Kid guilty and sentenced him to death by firing squad. The severity of this sentence reflected the military's need to discourage similar actions among other scouts rather than the specific evidence against Kid. General Miles, who had developed respect for Apache scouts during previous campaigns, intervened in the case. Using his authority as regional commander, he commuted Kid's sentence to 10 years imprisonment at Alcatraz Island in San Francisco Bay. This intervention saved Kid's life, but placed him in one of America's harshest prison environments. Kid served approximately 15 months of his sentence before an unexpected development altered his fate again. In October 1888, Secretary of War W.C. Endicott ordered the release of Apache Kid and his companions, citing procedural irregularities in their trial. This administrative decision, while legally sound, ignored the political and personal dimensions of the case. Upon Kid's return to Arizona Territory, Al Sieber, still physically disabled from his gunshot wound, lobbied successfully for new arrest warrants. The former scout now faced civilian charges for the shooting that had left Sieber permanently injured. The transition from military to civilian justice placed Kid before a local jury steeped in anti-Apache sentiment and heavily influenced by newspaper accounts of his supposed crimes. In the civilian trial, numerous witnesses provided testimony that contradicted their earlier statements at the military tribunal. Sieber himself claimed definitively that Kid had shot him, despite physical evidence and previous testimony indicating that Curley had fired the injurious bullet. Court records reveal a significant detail about Curley's motivation. He reportedly desired Kid's wife and saw the confrontation as an opportunity to eliminate his rival, echoing the earlier conflict between Rip and Togade Chews over Kid's mother. Neither prosecution nor defense called R. Helger, a blacksmith who had witnessed the shooting and could have testified that Curley, not Kid, had shot Sieber. This critical omission underscored the trial's predetermined outcome. The jury quickly found Apache Kid guilty of assault with intent to murder Al Sieber, and the judge sentenced him to 7 years in the territorial prison at Yuma. Before transfer to Yuma's notoriously brutal facility, Kid and other prisoners were temporarily held in Globe. On November 2, 1889, Sheriff Glenn Reynolds and his deputy William Holmes began transporting 8 prisoners including Apache Kid, toward the Yuma facility. The journey required traversing the steep, winding Kelvin grade, terrain that offered potential advantages to anyone attempting escape. As the wagon struggled up a particularly difficult stretch of road, the prisoners seized an opportunity. In the ensuing confrontation, both Reynolds and Holmes were killed. The wagon driver, Eugene Middleton, survived the attack. He later recounted that Apache Kid had spared his life, explaining that Middleton had treated him kindly and offered him tobacco during his confinement. Unlike previous escapes, this one proved permanent. While the other 7 escaped prisoners were eventually recaptured, Apache Kid vanished into the borderlands. His intimate knowledge of the terrain, language skills, and extensive network of contacts enabled him to evade the largest manhunt in southwestern history. The transformation from respected sergeant of scouts to Arizona's most wanted fugitive was complete, cementing Apache Kid's place in the complex mythology of the American frontier. Legend and mysterious death. When news of the Kelvin grade escape reached Sieber, he displayed no surprise. Despite dispatching 20 scouts to track Apache Kid, Sieber privately acknowledged the futility of the effort. "They'll never catch him," he reportedly told military officials. "He knows the country better than any man alive." For the next 4 decades, military personnel, bounty hunters, lawmen, and armed civilian possess searched relentlessly across the southwestern territories. The reward for Apache Kid's capture, dead or alive, escalated from the initial $500 to an unprecedented $5,000. Reflecting both authorities' frustration and the growing mythological status of their target. As the manhunt continued without success, Apache Kid transformed from fugitive to legend. Border communities from Sonora to New Mexico buzzed with reported sightings and near captures. Each retelling enhanced his reputation for almost supernatural evasion skills. Newspaper accounts described him as ghost-like and possessing the devil's own luck, further cementing his status in frontier mythology. In May 1890, a significant development occurred when Mexican forces killed an Apache warrior during a skirmish south of the border. The dead man possessed Sheriff Glenn Reynolds' gold pocket watch and revolver. Several witnesses identified the body as Apache Kid, seemingly bringing closure to the manhunt. However, others noted that the deceased appeared considerably older than Kid would have been, casting doubt on this identification. Reports of Apache Kid sightings continued across Arizona and northern Mexico, despite this supposed confirmation of his death. Ranchers attributed numerous cattle thefts to him, while a series of murders targeting cowboys and miners along the Sierra Madres during the 1890s further expanded his notorious reputation. Whether these crimes actually involved Apache Kid remains impossible to verify, but attribution to him satisfied the public's need for a recognizable villain. A particularly disturbing series of incidents occurred in the late 1890s, when several adult women disappeared from San Carlos Reservation. Local authorities attributed these kidnappings to Apache Kid, theorizing that he sought a new wife after his former spouse had been forcibly relocated from the territory. When the abductions suddenly ceased, many concluded that Kid had successfully found a companion, though no evidence confirmed this speculation. As decades passed without definitive confirmation of Apache Kid's fate, various theories emerged regarding his ultimate end. Joe Stevens, his childhood hunting companion, believed Kid eventually succumbed to alcoholism in the rugged hill country, where he had sought refuge. "The Tiswin finally took him," Stevens told an interviewer in 1915. "It was the curse that destroyed his father and eventually destroyed him too." Mexican Colonel Emilio Kosterlitsky offered a more optimistic assessment. Based on intelligence gathered from his network of informants, Kosterlitsky maintained that Apache Kid had established a new identity among the Tarahumara people in the Sierra Madre Occidental. According to this account, Kid abandoned his violent past and lived peacefully within this indigenous community that had little contact with outside authorities. Western writer Ben Camp published a sensational alternative theory in 1902, claiming that Apache Kid had been murdered by his own 17-year-old lieutenant, Billy Keene. Camp's account, based on questionable sources, included the gruesome detail that Keene had preserved Kid's severed head in chloride as proof of the killing. Similar unverifiable claims continued to surface periodically through the 1920s, each adding new layers to the Apache Kid mythology. Among the Apache people remaining at San Carlos, Kid's legacy took on supernatural dimensions. They regarded him as an ill omen, believing his wrath targeted not only white settlers, but also members of his own tribe who had cooperated with authorities. Many feared he might return to punish those who had opposed him, transforming the fugitive into a phantom-like figure in tribal folklore. The most widely accepted theory regarding Apache Kid's death emerged in 1894, when rancher Charles Anderson and his civilian militia claimed to have killed an Apache cattle thief in the San Mateo Mountains. Anderson identified the man as Apache Kid, and several items found on the body matched descriptions of Kid's possessions. However, with no official identification process and conflicting witness accounts, this version of Kid's demise remains contested among historians. The ultimate truth about Apache Kid's fate following the Kelvin Great escape remains one of the enduring mysteries of the American West. Documentary evidence ends with his flight into the borderlands, leaving only speculation, folklore, and contradictory accounts to fill the historical void. Yet beyond the sensational manhunt and unconfirmed reports lies a more profound historical narrative. The tragic journey of a young boy torn from his tribe, raised by military men of inconsistent character, and betrayed just as he began establishing a life he never chose for himself. Apache Kid's story transcends simple categorizations of hero or villain, revealing instead the complex cultural negotiations and impossible choices faced by indigenous people during America's western expansion. Whether Apache Kid lived out his days in peaceful anonymity south of the border or became the notorious criminal of legend, his story endures as a compelling mystery of the West and a powerful reminder of the brutality and harshness of frontier life.